Welcome back, folks. My name's Shane. If you follow the channel, you know recently I purchased a Panasonic G9II. I traded in a couple of older cameras to get this particular camera, and I planned on using it in combination with the S5IIX that I'm shooting this particular video with. And guess what? I actually put this through its paces yesterday as of shooting this in combination with the S5IIX. I'm going to talk about the shooting experience and the end result, because I've used this in enough situations now and in enough various temperature conditions to talk about the handling, the reliability, the ergonomics, all that kind of stuff. So this won't be a deep dive tech review video. I've already done that on my channel, and if you want that kind of video, I'll link it up in the cards. This will be a hands-on experience video using it for its intended purpose, to create stuff. That's what it's all about. So let's get into it. If you missed my last video on the G9II, I'll just talk a little bit about how I ended up deciding that this was the right camera for the job. So my primary camera for the shoot that we're doing here in Perth in Western Australia right now is the S5IIX. It's what I'm shooting this particular shot with, just in the natural picture profile. The G9II has all the same great color science as the S5IIX and the full version of Vlog, which means I can match these cameras beautifully in post with very little effort. Even though the sensor size is different, the color science is basically the same. Secondly, the G9II has the best in-body image stabilization I've ever seen, with the exception of a GoPro. So once you turn on the E-stabilization mode to high, you get almost gimbal-like results, completely handheld. This is something that's absolutely shocking when you first use it. It's awesome. So this is a massive advantage to the G9II over the S5IIX and X, which have great IBIS, but definitely not as good as the G9II. And thirdly, we get awesome slow motion out of the G9II, up to 4K at 120 frames per second, which can either be selected from the S&Q option or from the main movie dial. So you get a couple of different options here, but the great news is whether you're just hanging it out of the car window, shooting some scenery, or if you're doing any type of product B-roll, it drastically improves and increases your productivity. And the reason why is I can shoot 2 seconds in S&Q mode and get 8 seconds slowed down in camera. So you can imagine just how much more time I would save over just say shooting at 4K 50 or 60 frames per second. 2 seconds equals 8 seconds or more if I'm shooting at 120 frames per second in the PAL region. So it's pretty powerful. It's one of the main reasons why I ended up with this camera. One of the big reasons I chose the G9II is we get essentially the same body as the S5IIX and X, giving me all the same button and dial placement. And after I customized all the custom function buttons to work the way that I like and the Q menu, I get exactly the same experience, which really makes the whole process a lot easier when you're switching out cameras. While it's fun to choose a camera of a different brand, for example, having everything in the same position makes your life a whole lot easier, especially when you're doing any type of run and gun work. You don't have to think twice about where everything is. You only need to master one camera and you can remember everything for both. All right, let's talk about image quality. So one of the things I love about the S5IIX is just how professional the shot looks. The full frame sensor paired with this f1.8 prime lens at 24mm gives me the ultimate run and gun primary camera. We get a nice shallow depth of field without it being too blurry like an f1.4 or f1.2, and there's next to no focus breathing on this lens, which is fantastic. So you don't need to do any digital corrections after the fact. It just works and it looks amazing. Where the G9II really excels is for the product B-roll shots for this particular shoot, because I get more in focus even at f1.7. So if I was shooting f1.7 on a full frame camera system, I would only have the corner of something in focus. Whereas on micro four thirds, I'm getting the shallow depth of field look equivalent of about f3.4, which is perfect for shooting products. Even 2.8 on full frame isn't shallow enough for shooting products properly. You'll still only get a little corner of something in focus unless you're shooting flat on. Now, I was able to get excellent results for the shoot that I was doing, shooting with the 9mm f1.7, whether I was up close or doing a wide shot, or the 25mm f1.7. It's the perfect B-roll combination for shooting slow motion shots. The G9II absolutely exceeded my expectations. As you can see from these images on screen, it did a great job just shooting in the natural picture profile. Just shooting in the natural picture profile, I was able to get essentially the same look out of both cameras, so I can put them both on the timeline and they match beautifully. The only thing I wish I had have done in hindsight now is to shoot in Vlog, because there was a few shots where there's a lot of light in certain parts of the shot and it was dark in others, so I would have liked to have had more control over the dynamic range and end result. But at the end of the day, both cameras matched beautifully on the timeline with no corrections. This is the best thing about it. I might have corrected the levels on a few shots, but I didn't have to go through and match hundreds of shots when it came to its color profile. They just match beautifully, saves me a whole lot of time. If you've never been to Perth in Western Australia, this particular place gets stinking hot, man. It can get up to 38, 40 degrees Celsius, no problems at all. And that's over, I think, around 100 Fahrenheit. I don't know the exact conversion, I'll leave it on screen. But it gets really hot here, but the great news is the wind kicks in every afternoon. It's 12 o'clock right now in the afternoon, and the wind's just kicked in and it's cooled right down. But I wanted to get out of the sun because it's really easy to get a little bit of heat stroke. I just wanted to touch on the battery life on both cameras. So they both did great. While I always have a couple of these BLK22 batteries in the camera bag as a backup, I didn't actually get over to the backup batteries. They just worked the entire shoot, which was from 10 AM to 12:30 PM. So 2.5 hours, one battery in either camera, and it worked perfectly. Now I still had about half battery left in one camera and about a quarter left in the other. But that is pretty cool considering that's a 2.5 hour shoot with the cameras going into standby, turning them back on, turning them off, turning them on, all that kind of stuff. It wasn't a full 2.5 hour duration shoot, like just letting it roll. There's lots of stops and starts, probably 300 clips overall, and the battery life did a great job on both cameras. So yeah, no complaints, even shooting 4K at 120 frames per second. Now I have 3 lenses in my camera bag for this particular trip: the 9mm f1.7 prime, the 25mm f1.7 prime, and the 12 to 35mm f2.8, which is actually in this bag right here. Now, primarily we were using these 2 lenses, so the 9mm and the 25. This 9mm might be my favorite micro 4/3 lens possibly ever. It looks beautiful, it's sharp, the contrast looks amazing. I've reviewed this in the past, but I'm really starting to appreciate just how great it is having an 18mm field of view equivalent. And if you're turning on the active stabilization modes or the E-stabilization modes inside the G9 Mark II, you kind of crop in a little bit, but it's still wide enough where you can get excellent results, and just the overall pop of this lens is great. While it doesn't give you as much shallow depth of field, for example, as the 18mm f1.8 on the full frame camera system, for what I was using it for, it looks great. Being able to shoot scenery out of the car, as I mentioned earlier, being able to do product shots with this was really impressive. The minimum focusing distance is great, and the overall look of it is really something else. The 25mm f1.7 prime lens didn't let me down. Again, it's such a great pairing for the G9 Mark II. It's the first time that this lens has had great autofocus performance on a camera. But again, I shoot a lot of my product B-roll in manual focus, but for the times where I needed autofocus, it did a really great job. And if you're on the fence deciding which prime lens to buy, I think this is the best value prime you can buy from any system. 25mm f1.7 gives you that 50mm equivalent, nice subject separation and background blur, all that kind of stuff, without getting too carried away, both in terms of price and blurry background. So it's a really great choice, especially for product B-roll. And lastly, I had the 12 to 35mm f2.8 zoom lens, which is one of my favorite zoom lenses, again, from any system. I owned a Sigma 24-70 for a day, and then I realized just how big and clunky it was. This lens might not give you the same look as f2.8 on a full frame system, but it has optical image stabilization. It's small, I can pop it in the bag, and this shot a lot of the shots outside of the store, as well as some of the hard to reach places that the 25mm couldn't cover. So having that 12 to 35mm with a constant 2.8 aperture is an absolute no-brainer, especially for the shop shoots. Again, having more in focus is what I actually want while keeping the ISO down, and this did a great job at its intended purpose. While this has been overly favorable, I'm going to mention one nitpick I have with both cameras, and that pertains to S and Q mode, which is where the camera slows down the footage for you and then you don't have to do it on the timeline. So if I'm shooting 4K 60 on the S5IIX or 4K 60 or 100 frames per second or 120 on the G9 Mark II, it actually has a slight delay when you hit record. This doesn't happen when you go through the regular frame rate mode. So I could be on the G9 Mark II and shooting 100 frames per second from the regular record menu option, and it just starts recording when you hit the shutter. But when I'm in S&Q mode, there's a 1 second delay. This must have something to do with the processing required to do all of this in camera. It's something I did notice at the time of my review, but using them both in this type of scenario, I noticed it big time. So they both have exactly the same delay. So yeah, just keep your eye focused on the timer. Once it starts counting, you're good to go. Because if you just need a short clip, you hit it for a second, hit it again, you're going to not get anything captured, right? So yeah, there is a slight delay. Hopefully Panasonic can address this and just reduce the amount of time it takes to start recording. That would be awesome, but yeah, I just wanted to put this in just to keep some balance. All right, it's the hottest day we've had here. It's got up to almost 40 degrees Celsius today, which is insane. We're going to talk a little bit about overheating, and I'm shooting this particular section on the G9 Mark II and the 9mm f1.7 prime. So this camera has two temperature thresholds, standard and high. I did see a heat warning message when I was shooting out in the field on the first day. Got up to about 36, 37 degrees Celsius, and I switched it over to the high mode, turned the camera off, turned it back on. I never saw the warning again, and I've never seen a warning since. Even today, I shot all day today, shooting photos and videos in different types of color profiles and modes and all that kind of stuff, and I was dripping, sweating, and the camera had no problems staying operational the entire time. So unless you're shooting 4K at 120 frames per second indefinitely, or shooting on an extremely hot day and just doing that kind of crazy stuff, then I don't think you're going to have too much of a problem with this. The great news is most of what I've shot on this particular camera has been 5.8K open gate. It still hasn't overheated, so set the temperature threshold to high and you should be good to go. Now, one of the questions you might have is, can you use this G9 Mark II as an A camera instead of a B camera? Absolutely. I loved using this so much. I could see myself taking 2 of these overseas to shoot the exact same show. That's how much I like it. And you can find fast prime lenses that still give you nice subject separation. So this is full frame f1.8. You can get the equivalent of an f2.8 shallow depth of field, or f2.4, which is right about here, which is f2.5. on micro 4/3. This is the kind of like f1.4 equivalent background blur. So if you're happy with this, save yourself some money. The lenses are cheaper for micro 4/3, and it has still a lot of advantages depending on your shooting scenario. But again, if you want the look that you pay for, which is that blurry background, full frame is definitely a better choice. It makes getting that a whole lot easier. But man, the G9 Mark II is an absolute beast. I was so embarrassed to post a video about buying a GH5 Mark II again in 2023, just to the end of that year, and then trading it in for the G9 Mark II. But I feel like I've done the right thing, especially after seeing the results. I mean, it just made the shooting experience a lot easier, and that's what it should be all about. It's about having fun too and finding the right tool for the job, all that kind of stuff. I know I'm nuts, but that's why you're here. Anyway, if you'd like camera stuff, subscribe, click the bell, and I will catch you on the next video. Catch you soon. See ya.